Look, I'll be honest with you. Usually I do not enjoy it when offensive and defensive coordinators speak to the media because they give boring, bland answers. They're afraid of angering the head guy. This is different. I got excited listening to Bobby Slowik, the new Texans offensive coordinator, and Matt Burke, the defensive coordinator. A, because I don't think they're terrified of DeMeco Ryans yet. That'll come with time. B, because this is the getting to know you stage. There aren't any game plans to be given away. There isn't a hyper paranoia over what the competition might learn. So I thought we learned some really good things here. I'm just going to go through and watch a few select clips that got my juices going, and hopefully they get your juices going too. Bobby Slowik starts it off.
We see everything working together is, we're an offense built on precision. Everybody kind of working together in unison, on time, in rhythm. That's the starting point. But it's not any one given position. We see how it all fits.
Okay, so he was asked there about the quarterback position. And I look, honestly, when he started talking about the precision, I got worked up just because a lot of times with first-time coordinators, first-time head coaches, you see a tendency to want to do everything all at once. You want to install every package. You want to use every player. You want to show off just how smart you are. I think if there's one thing that's drilled into the heads of people from the Kubiak-Shanahan system, Kubiak-Shanahan, that whole coaching tree and philosophy, it's that you do things you better execute with precision because that's what makes the whole thing run. The reason that defenses bite on the play action is because they do such a good job in this offense of making things look like the pass when it's run or making it look like it's run when it's pass. And that all starts with precision. So I don't think we're going to have to worry about Bobby Slowik, trying to impress everybody with his genius right off the bat. I think he very much understands, and I've watched other press conferences with him where he's shown that he understands it. It's execution, execution, execution. Gary Kubiak used to tell me, when I would quiz him about the offensive side of the ball, he said it's reps based. It's reps, reps, reps. This is why a lot of times quarterbacks don't do that well in their first year in this system. That would go Matt Ryan with the Falcons, Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay, Matt Schaub in Houston. I know there's a slightly different category there, but I got excited about just the word precision. More Bobby Slowik.
And then Bill is someone that really, I know he's been around. I heard his name. He's been in the NFL a long time. He's coached.
He's talking about Bill Lazor here. So Bill Lazor, who is a college teammate of mine. I'm being a little bit selfish putting this in here, but this is important.
Really long time. And I had a lot of conversations with him before he came here. And, we got a bond and a connection and a relationship. And he's called plays before. He's installed schemes before. He's done it all, and he's done it in many different ways. And just even since he's been here, it's been really exciting to be able to talk and have someone who's gone through it before, can kind of eliminate the speed bumps, get you over them that much faster.
So look, Bill Lazor is a name that a lot of you might recognize, if only because it's a cool last name, but he has been around a lot. He's been a coordinator. He's been in multiple different offenses, and he's been in the league a long time, a couple decades now. I think that, John McClain had been pushing real hard for DeMeco to have a veteran head coach to be kind of a mentor for him to help him through different situations. I'm not that worried about that. I think DeMeco's got plenty of mentors around the league that he's got on speed dial. It's a matter of your coordinators, especially, I think, having that advice. And, we looked at that in Denver last year, where the defensive coordinator, his name escapes me right now, but had Dom Capers as a senior defensive assistant on staff. I think that Bill Lazor, who might be still getting paid from his last stop in the NFL, is going to be a really good resource for Bobby Slowik. I think in a lot of these kind of, whether it's player management side or are we giving the players too much, Bill's going to be a really good resource for that. He's very, very well respected as a really intelligent guy. I think maybe another hidden asset here would be that Lazor isn't usually mentioned. I haven't heard him mentioned a lot as head coaching material or, in that pipeline. Maybe that's just because he hasn't had a great stint on a great team as an offensive coordinator. But if Bobby Slowik were to have a great 2-year run and got yanked away as a head coach somewhere else, then, maybe Bill Lazor is right there to fill in. And this is what I've long advocated, is you got to have a pipeline of coaches, whether it's guys that are assistants, senior assistants, whatever it might be. Lazor might be one of those guys that's available in case Bobby Slowik, who looks a little bit more like a head coach in this interview than I think he had previously. He's starting to grow into the role a little bit. I don't want to get the cart ahead of the horse here. First, we got to establish a winning culture here in Houston.
Everything we want starts with, are we fast, are we physical, are we tough? And that, again, is when you turn on the tape of our offense, that's what you want to see. That should be the first thing that jumps out to you.
Okay, are we fast? Are we physical? Are we tough? We're going to start getting a whole lot of acronyms, a whole lot of, slogans. It was smart, tough, dependable with the old crew. Right now, there's the SWARM acronym. I'm all for it. I love the motivational signs and slogans in the beginning. If they work out, then they are your Bible to live by. If they're not, then you deride them and mock them later on. But I think when you think about that description that Slowik just used, that is what the San Francisco offense was. And again, it doesn't have to be predicated on offensive genius or X's and O's or anything like that. It starts with a mindset, and I think that's one thing that DeMeco has been very consistent with, and that all his assistants echo. They take real pride in stressing that. And I know every coach comes in and talks about that. I think the proof is in the pudding with the style of play that San Francisco has had, that's something that they drill into those guys. And I think also importantly, they select for it. I think John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco have done a good job selecting for those types of players. DeMeco Ryans, in one of his press conferences that I watched in San Francisco this year, talked about how they have a certain standard, a certain expectation of physicality, and they don't have to talk a whole lot about it because the standard is the standard, and they take guys on that team who understand what that standard is and play up to it. You can tell I'm getting amped up already.
We were in the same room together as that first year.
Okay, so he's talking about DeMeco Ryans and himself, Bobby Slowik, being quality control coaches. This is after DeMeco has already been a successful NFL coach, but Kyle Shanahan brought him in and made him go, start at the bottom and work your way up. Start doing the entry-level work.
2017 as QCs on defense. He was working with Johnny Holland at the time. I was kind of in and out with him and Robert Saleh, and we really built a bond just going through that whole process. And 2017 was a tough year. 2018 was a little bit of a tough year. And when you go through stuff like that and you're always in a room with somebody, you really get to know each other through the ups and the downs. So that was number one, just being able to be around what I consider a very, very special person and a very special coach. And then on top of that, there's a lot of exciting things at the Texans. There's a lot of youth on the roster. There's some guys that can really come play. There's a lot of capital that you have that you can take advantage of in the offseason to keep putting pieces together. And in my conversations with Nick, I really got excited about just his approach and how he sees the game, how he sees roster construction and everything really together.
Okay, so that bond between DeMeco and Bobby Slowik. Let me write down this approach there too, because I want to address that. This bond between Slowik and DeMeco, I got excited when I heard about that, just because that it's an indication that, look, this is not just some guy that DeMeco figured was, this is the best we can get right now, or maybe the guy I really want isn't here. You get this image, don't you, of these two guys working as quality control guys, and that means you're grinding film. You're doing a lot of the menial tasks. I give Kyle Shanahan a whole lot of credit for telling DeMeco, hey, this is something you got to do. You got to go through every level of the organization. You got to do the grunt work as a quality control guy. Compare that perhaps to some notion of Josh McCown just stepping into the head role and acting like he knows what the hell he's doing. Like DeMeco has said, basically he didn't know what he didn't know because he had never been through all of those indoctrination steps when it comes to coaching. So Bobby Slowik and DeMeco Ryans, despite DeMeco having had this great NFL career, we're starting at the bottom and figuring this out and learning together step by step, which is a really cool picture when you think about DeMeco probably really, thinking about Bobby as a guy who came in with him in a lot of ways and could grow with and that these guys have had a lot of conversations maybe about how they do it when it got to be their time. It's a good feeling. It really feels like genuine alignment and not just something you say in a press conference.
Yeah, I mean, to start with, as far as our identity,
So again, he's was asked about their identity as an offense, and then I believe was also asked about quarterback stuff. I'm more concerned about the identity stuff at this point.
kind of already hit it, but fast, physical, tough. And it all starts from there. And we had always said this when I was at San Francisco, and I believe this to my core. If you get in a room and you're by yourself and you turn on our film, our character should show through when you watch our offense. And I believe that was true when we were in San Francisco, and that's going to be true here. When you get in a room by yourself and you turn on what we call the silent tape, you're going to feel a team that's very aggressive, that's fast, that's decisive. There's not hesitation. Everyone knows what we're doing, and we enjoy playing the game.
Okay, decisive, fast, enjoy playing the game. That is stuff that just shows through on, he calls it the silent film, the coach's film, the all-22. There's no sound. It gets very, very boring. Like that, you got to listen to music or something sometimes to keep yourself awake if you're really grinding. But that is something that just shows up, and you see it in individuals, guys that are chasing to the sideline, guys that are making plays 20 yards downfield, just actual collisions. In one version of this, which is I guess the opposite but same concept, was Tom Coughlin used to say, I'll be able to close my eyes and tell if the intensity is right by the sounds. I'll be able to hear the helmets crash. And we always kind of wondered, like, well, yeah, but like if we're how do you know which side is winning? We could be getting our asses kicked, but you're going to hear the helmets crash. But you get the picture. He knew, and honestly, in a playoff game, there's a level of physicality where both sides are bringing it. And that's like what you dream of. You dream of those games where it just feels like an all-out battle royale, and you get that in the playoffs more so than any other place. Everything is really fast and violent, and more so than anything you've ever felt before. And when you watch the 49ers consistently, that's the standard they lived up to. There was that stretch of time during the season where all of their opponents had lost the next week's game. Like the 49ers would play a game, and the team they played, possibly, maybe it's just random chance, but the team they played would be so beat up that they would lose the next week. That's the kind of physicality we want. And the cool thing about that is that's not promising a record. That's not promising a specific outcome in 2023. I want to see more brutality on the football field. And it feels like even Bobby Slowik, who comes off like this, like a bookish computer professor or something, he's all about that. And he says a few more things later that I think you can see how he gets that out of his players without having to necessarily be the rah-rah wannabe Marine Corps boot camp instructor.
Kyle would make sure that.
Okay, so here he's talking about how Kyle Shanahan prepares these guys to be coaches. And Kyle Shanahan has had so many guys that have gone on to have success either as coordinators or head coaches. It's there's a process behind it, and it's interesting to hear this.
You were ready when it was your time, and he put a lot on you in a good way. He would make sure that you were seeing the game he saw, and if you weren't, you would have a conversation. We would talk about it, and again, it really enabled you to grow as a coach, which was I was very fortunate to be in that spot.
So if you think about the success of Shanahan's guys versus the lack of success of Belichick's guys, I think there are a couple things that go into it. For one, I think that Belichick just kind of hires a certain type of coach or person that's maybe a little bit more on the analytical side of things and not necessarily on the human side of things. Not always. I think Romeo Crennel had a great touch for people. He wasn't necessarily a great head coach, obviously, but I think there's something to that. But then I also think that Kyle Shanahan is very much about teaching his guys the whole game, which includes how to be a head coach, the human sides of being a coordinator, all of that. And what that does is that creates this pipeline where, okay, you're going to lose a lot of guys and they're going to go off and get opportunities, but you're also going to be attracting the really bright guys, the guys that have a future, the guys that are driven are going to look at you like, okay, I got to get to see. I got to go play for Kyle Shanahan because that's the conduit to becoming an NFL head coach. I could see DeMeco Ryans being that exact same guy because that's the way DeMeco, I think even more so than Kyle, is kind of hardwired to be a guy who helps and wants to help boost guys up. And I don't mean that as any kind of a slight whatsoever against Kyle Shanahan. I just think DeMeco's that much more of that kind of natural teacher, that natural giver. And it's again, no way for me to say that without it sounding like it's an insult to Kyle Shanahan. For the love of God, I'm not trying to, but that part excites me, and I do think that it makes me feel better about Bobby Slowik and his his complete lack of experience as a play caller. Is that there's been a process that he's gone through. I think about when Josh McDaniels bailed out of the job in Indianapolis. The story goes that he went back to clean his stuff out in New England. And Bill Belichick realized what was happening. Like, oh, wow, this is real. I'm actually going to lose Josh McDaniels. Like he genuinely hadn't really thought about it that much, which sounds crazy, but I kind of get it. I think some people are just so focused that stuff actually happens. But basically the story was that Belichick told McDaniels, hey, I'll teach you everything about being a head coach. Stick around and I'll give you the whole spiel, like the whole shebang, all the stuff we do with cap management, etc. And I just wonder if Kyle Shanahan spends more time with all his assistants talking to them about that kind of stuff. You hear these guys talk a lot about having a common philosophy, a common belief about the way you should structure a football team, all those things that sound like higher level philosophical conversations that frankly I don't hear out of a lot of other coaches. And I think Kyle Shanahan probably deserves a lot of credit for that.
I respected him a great deal as a football player.
Okay, so this is Bobby Slowik talking about his relationship with DeMeco Ryans and getting to know him after having scouted him, or watched him while he was in coaching staffs and DeMeco as a player, but when he first met him as a coach.
But I was not sure what I was going to get when we actually started a conversation. Then immediately you start talking to him and you just feel energy. You feel juice. You feel a guy who's just excited to be there, excited to live, excited to be a part of something where there's competition at stake, and that really inspires you. And as you talk to him more, you start to realize that we have very, very similar values. We have very, very similar football opinions and outlooks as far as how we see the game and kind of how we approach the game, how we approach teaching. And that's kind of where it started to take off as far as the relationship goes, is we had a lot of similarities, and it was really fun going back and forth because, we were in a room together. The linebacker coach, Johnny Holland, was DeMeco's, I would call him mentor as far as a coach when he was here in Houston, and same developing as a coach on defense, and he did the same for me. So all three of us together was a really fun experience.
Yeah, so again, I think right there when they talk about the same ideas about teaching, DeMeco's talked about how his favorite teaching technique is to have a guy teach back to him. Like, okay, I'm going to explain it to you, but just I want to be sure that we're saying the same thing. So go ahead and teach it back to me. That's, frankly, compared to, I would say, most football coaches that I've had, that's twice the amount of commitment and effort of most football coaches that I've had, where it's a whole lot of like, hey, here's how you do it. Now do it right or you're going to get yelled at. It's a whole effort level when you ask a guy to teach it back to you. And then usually there's another back and forth after that. So we might say it's 4 times as much teaching as you give the average guy. And that's, like I alluded to earlier, I think you get a certain amount of buy-in from players just because of that level of respect you give to them. And players just, you sense it, man. When a guy just genuinely wants you to understand because he wants you to do well as a player, it creates such a bond. And it does. Guys, like, coaches become father figures so easily. I don't think most coaches understand how easy it is to become a father figure to a player if you just do those things that like the ideal father would be or would do. And I think these guys get that. It's I might be the most naive son of a bitch in the world. I don't care. I am all in on these guys right now. There's a certain vibe about this coaching staff, their relationship with Nick Caserio, that's different. It feels different than other staffs I've seen. And we're in the honeymoon phase to the extreme degree right now. There's still a lot of work to do. But I'm buying it hook, line, and sinker.
DeMeco's
so here we go. So this is Matt Burke, defensive coordinator. Played at Dartmouth. He was the defensive coordinator at Miami for a couple of years. He's been a defensive line coach and a linebackers coach, and he talks about how that has shaped him as well. He's also got a little bit of experience with the Titans when they were the recent Houston Oilers, with some names dropped in here that you will recognize.
And kind of lined up in terms of how we see defense being played. And
so he's talking about him and DeMeco and their philosophies.
We want to be aggressive and an attack front, and I have a history in that front, and obviously what DeMeco did in San Fran. So at the end of the day, my job's try to help him execute his vision for what he wants. So when I think the attraction coming here, there's some pieces on defense that we like, that we're looking forward to working with, and obviously still in the process of really getting to know those players. They're just starting to come back and work out some of the guys who are kind of bumping into them around here. So but I think just that foundationally, like, excited for some of the pieces that think fit what we're looking to do. But we're going to be an aggressive attack front and try to get these guys getting off the ball and trying to dictate a little bit instead of being reactionary on defense.
Look, you hear that a lot too, right? Hey, we're going to be aggressive. We're going to get off the ball. The thing that's different about DeMeco's defense is it's been really cool to watch is that there are defenses oftentimes, like if you look at Lovie Smith's defense, if you think about Leslie Frazier up in Buffalo, which is a version of Lovie Smith's defense, Tampa for a long time, those defenses weren't necessarily good versus the run because there's a whole lot of like, hey, we're going to rush the passer and play the run on the way to the quarterback. That kind of a vibe. We want to make big plays in the backfield. That'll take care of the run. Get him into 2nd and 15. That takes care of the run. DeMeco's not having any of that, man. DeMeco wants aggressive guys up front, but who will not play the run on the way to the quarterback, but beat the snot out of the running back as he's blocking you, just in case he's the ball carrier, but then also destroy the quarterback. Like, it is a complete annihilation mentality, more so than a lot of these quote-unquote attack defenses. Frankly, a lot of attack defenses are kind of soft in their mindsets. And there have been a lot of guys on some of those defenses that get a lot of sacks, but don't necessarily give a damn about the run. That does not fly in a DeMeco Ryans, Robert Saleh type defense. And that gets me excited too. Because, man, you get guys that are capable of rushing the passer, but genuinely want to also stop the run, like that take just as much pride in stopping the run. That's some good stuff, man. And that's when you end up with a top defense. That's when you end up with a defense that doesn't just compile sacks, but it helps you win football games. You win time of possession. You deliver the ball to the offense with not bend but don't break, but just freaking annihilate and get a 3 and out. That part got me going. Those guys are aligned in that respect.
The biggest sort of change or growth for me in my career was moving to D-line. I've been a linebacker coach for a long time, and then the coordinator stint, and then kind of came back and started coaching D-line, and just from a different perspective and having to like relate to a different set of players and sort of look at things from a different lens really sort of for me changed sort of just some, I don't know, my career path, but just sort of like that was the biggest growth I saw for me. I mean, I literally had to, that year, the year I made the move to D-line was in Philly in 2020, I think. We had it was Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham, and it was a serious crew. Like, I had to get up to speed pretty quick.
Okay, couple things there. One, I'll start from the back forwards. He mentioned that year 2020 in Philadelphia. The thing that's interesting about that was that he was part of bringing Javon Hargrave in as a free agent. Javon Hargrave had been in a defense in Pittsburgh where it was more read and react. It wasn't as aggressive and upfield, but he was part of turning Javon Hargrave into the guy he is now. He's a free agent right now. So I'm just saying, Javon Hargrave might be a little bit more intrigued with the Houston Texans, despite their paltry record last year. He's got a connection with Matt Burke, and then obviously DeMeco comes with a calling card. I think the first part is, it is interesting the way this defense has leadership at the top, which is DeMeco Ryans, former linebacker and a linebackers coach, and Matt Burke as the defensive coordinator. We don't know if he's going to call plays or not, but as a defensive line coach and also a linebackers coach. That's different than the trend right now, right? The trend in a lot of ways is, all right, we want the guys, we want the people from the passing game, we want the coverage guys. DeMeco knows plenty about coverage. I have zero qualms about him, and obviously these last 2 years as a defensive coordinator, that's been a huge part of it. But the philosophy of getting after it with your guys up front and understanding the challenges that come with that, it's not something that's always so simple. Like Andy Reid, I think, being a former offensive lineman and offensive line coach, I think gives him a different perspective than a lot of NFL head coaches. I think likewise, DeMeco Ryans being a front seven guy on defense gives him a different perspective. So I'm biased because I'm a defensive lineman, obviously, but I like that part of it. I'm intrigued by it.
We all believe that if you can get after the passer with
Okay, and here we talk about that philosophy of getting after the passer with those guys up front.
four and can rush and not have to commit extra resource to that, so then your coverage elements can stay sort of pure. Like, that's the best thing. So obviously putting resources in the D-line and having guys that can attack up there. Again, if you don't have that D-line, now you have to start adding pieces to the rush, to the pressure part. Now you're taking away from the coverage.
Okay, and if you look at the 49ers this past year, really the last 2 seasons, I know a lot of times people are fond of saying, well, that 49ers defense was just stacked with talent. I said, not really. They had some stud players, don't get me wrong, but they weren't all high draft picks, for one. Yes, you've got a Bosa, but you've also got a Fred Warner, who's not a high draft pick, but became one of the best linebackers in the league. In the defensive backfield 2 years ago, they had real troubles. They had real troubles coverage in covering man on man. And DeMeco made a lot of improvements as the year went on in learning how to manage the guys that they did have. They had to play more zone than DeMeco probably would have liked. This last year, they had a liability on one half of the field in Lenore, the cornerback, and they obviously made do with it, partly because they had those guys up front that could attack. So that when you do blitz, it's a little bit of an ambush, and they're coming like kamikazes, and the guys on the back end aren't under pressure all the time. They can batten the hatches down on the times you do blitz, but you're giving them a lot of cushion for the times that you don't blitz because the defensive front up front is doing so well. I think there's a really good chance the more I listen to these guys that they're going to be pretty heavy on drafting defensive guys early in the draft. I don't give a damn. You might want receivers. I say give me people who can harass, injure, and cripple quarterbacks.
Task is to really dig into these guys, whether it's draft or free agency, and sort of project, okay,
now we're talking about free agency. Remember, DeMeco left I guess this is important. DeMeco left the coaches behind other than himself at the combine, partly because he wanted the coaches to start getting a feel for these free agents, because they need to understand what kind of guys they're looking for. So Burke can get everybody on board with what kind of defense they're running. Slowik can get everybody on board with what they're looking for on offense. And then you can start to have conversations about these free agents, which is the much more imminent concern than the draft. The coach will have time to catch up on the draft, but you really want their input right now on potential free agents.
Bring them into the scheme and the techniques that we're asking these guys to play. Like, can they have success doing that? So I think that's really sort of what we're undergoing right now. And as we sort of watch our scheme stuff, we're kind of doing half scheme, half sort of free agent draft stuff right now. I think that's the biggest task as we talk scheme. Like, okay, hey, these are the things we're going to ask these guys to do, not just up front, like all these positions. All right, what are we asking our linebackers to do? What are we asking our corners to do? What are we asking our ends to do? And then finding guys that can do those tasks and do them at a high level. So that's kind of the task that we're sort of undertaking right now.
I'll tell you one, and this is a Jaguars story, not a Texans story. So nobody has to, you don't have to feel bad if you're a Texans fan about the woebegone days of bad decisions. This was a bad decision when the Jaguars were actually good. We went all in on free agency one year and signed a lot of guys who are kind of aging free agents, but Coughlin just wanted to get that nudge to get us over the top. So they signed Bryce Pop to a nice contract. He's up there in years, but I can remember the first day of minicamp. Bryce Pop was a pass rusher, former defensive player of the year up in Buffalo. Very, very good player, awesome guy. He came in, but he was mostly a pass rusher. He was a good edge rusher. I remember on the first day of minicamps, he came back to the huddle and he said, I don't know if these guys think that I'm going to be covering tight ends all over the field, but that ain't my thing. Like, basically, he wasn't saying he didn't want to do it. He was saying he wasn't good at it because they had him all over the place in coverage. They're having him play more of a classic Sam linebacker or a 4-3 outside linebacker position instead of like a Wade Phillips style outside linebacker. And it was a bad fit. And this happens at times. It happened with the Texans a few times with different free agents. And I'm not criticizing Bryce Pop whatsoever. That was a bad decision by the Texans in free agency. So you want to avoid that as much as possible. If the Jaguars had to do it over that year, they would have said, okay, yeah, you know what? It's better to just try to develop some of these younger guys than overpay an older guy and ask him to do stuff that he's not really capable of doing.
And then I spent flew to Tanzania and spent.
Okay, so this is Burke talking about his trip climbing Kilimanjaro, which was just an interesting story. So we'll close on this. He's been described as the most interesting man in the NFL. I feel that's unfair to him. Like, nobody wants that moniker. Then all of a sudden, you got to be the guy doing shots tequila every time you go out. I think he's more an interesting guy in that he likes to read and travel. There's a little bit more depth to him than perhaps a lot of NFL coaches. And I think you find that about a lot of these guys. They're all, I don't want to say they're deep thinkers because sometimes that can be a bad thing as a coach, but they're deep thinkers. They think about not just football philosophy, but a lot of other things in life. I think that helps you relate to players. But this is him on his story about climbing Mount Kilimanjaro and showing a certain degree of humility while telling it.
8 days there hiking Kili. It was probably
okay, and he calls it Kili. I'm gonna let it slide because I totally, if I went and I climbed Kilimanjaro, I would probably get caught up in the lingo, and I'd be like, yeah, back when I was climbing Kili that time, the fourth time I climbed Kili. I'll let it pass.
Probably the most challenging adventure I've done. I would say there was I did a different route. I did 6 days to summit and then 2 days back down. So it was a challenging sort of 8 day stretch for me. But it's the only time in all my travels I got altitude sickness. It was about my third day. I was probably about 14,000, and I was like, I was in it. I was in the weeds, man. I was in my tent, panicking. It was fever symptoms. I'm sweating. I didn't sleep all night. And my guide, I'm freaking out. And my guide was like, you're fine, we're good. And the next day, so as you hike, I was basically hiked from the west, hiking east, and then sort of went to the north of the mountain as you sort of circumnavigate it. And you hike ridges, so you kind of get elevation and come back down. That's how you acclimatize. So he knew the next day we were going to kind of be dropping in a little bit, and I was going to regulate my body. But that night, I was freaking out. I was like, I'm not going to do this. I was panicking, and but he kind of talked me through it. Literally, he gave me aspirin. I was like, that's your solution? He gave me a couple of aspirin, and I was like, God dang, man. And so I was kind of worried. So you summit day, you hit base camp in the afternoon, you sleep, and then you start summiting at midnight so you can get up, because we crested the ridge at about 6:30 in the morning as the sun was coming up. So I was worried, but actually when I got to the top, I was in good shape. There were a couple of people in my group that were kind of struggling a little bit. I was up there taking pictures. I was so happy. I was flitting around. So the guy literally was like, hey man, we got to go. The other people were having trouble breathing and stuff. So I had my challenge more in the middle of the trip. So when I got to the summit, it was just such a joyous thing for me, man. I was really just blessed. It was just a cool experience. And it's, Kili's such just an isolated volcano in the middle, so you can just kind of see out for days and days. It was a really just unique experience for me, for sure.
Okay, so yeah, look, I appreciate anybody that has, even if it's a self-imposed life challenging. What's the situation? Life risking challenge? I don't know. But when what he's talking about there, that panic, it's people die at high altitude mountain climbing. So I respect people that go through challenges like that. Obviously, people in the military or other high risk situations, it's 80 times more impressive because of the duty involved. Plus you sign up for it when you're young and you might not necessarily know what you're getting into, and then all of a sudden, oh wow, I am committed to this. But he's an interesting guy, and I do think that there's a certain certain level of humanity on this staff that I like so far. I feel like a lot of these guys are pretty interesting guys.
So I think like the connection part of it, I think both sort of sides were telling the other person, like,
Okay, so this is him talking about when he got to know how DeMeco Ryans and him hooked up, despite not having direct connections. They had some, common acquaintances, Robert Saleh and people like that.
like, man, this is someone you should really meet up with. You guys would get along, like your philosophies align. And as we started going through this process, the interview process, I think that came out for both of us. I'll give you another story time. We got a side note. The first time we actually sort of had a real interaction, we did a Zoom interview. And so it was scheduled, I think like 7 o'clock. And my son actually fell and cracked his eye open. I had to take him to the hospital to get stitches. So I'm like, it's like my first job interview. And I'm like, damn it, I'm texting DeMeco. I'm like, can we push this back a little bit? I'm sorry. I'm like, and so then like, I like had this like panic Zoom interview with him. And I'm like 2 hours, I was 2 hours late to my interview type of thing. So, but I think, like I said, once we got talking, it was just, literally like kind of everything lined up in terms of how we see the game, how we want to coach, how we want to play football, how we want to play defense. Like I just really like sort of like everything that everyone had been telling me about him, and I think vice versa has just started to connect and mesh. So it was just kind of cool. We spent a few days kind of going through the process, and I think like all the checkpoints along the way, we both felt good about, man, this is exactly how I see things. So kind of lined up like that.
This is starting to be a common theme too, because remember when DeMeco interviewed with Caserio and Cal McNair, he was coming off of a practice that ran late. It's not like DeMeco's going to tell Kyle Shanahan, "Hey, coach, you got to cut practice short," right before the NFC Championship game because I've got an interview to get to. So it was, but DeMeco, I can't remember, was it DeMeco or Caserio who talked about, sometimes in a situation like that, it's easier to be natural and you just don't think about it. And maybe Burke there too, in that situation, because he's clamoring just to get to the interview. You don't have time to triple check your notes, and it's just you in the interview. And it reminds me, sometimes I've heard some of these interviews of, like big time CEOs and business leaders. It's kind of like when you're interviewing a head coach, it might be a day long or 2 day long interview. And it was when Steve Jobs was interviewing the guy who came over from PepsiCo to be the president of Apple, or to be the marketing director of Apple. And it was interesting. Like they were walking, like they went to like the Museum of Modern Art or something. They were walking through a park, and they were just having more of a deep philosophical conversation to see if you vibe with somebody. And I've told you guys before, the interviewing of a football coach, really, it's like dating. This is a high intensity job that you're going to spend a lot of time with people. You're going to spend more time with them than you will actually with your spouse. So it makes sense that you would spend a whole lot of time getting to know them, and it needs to ideally be more than just checking off boxes or liking the pep talk that somebody gives you. It really should be, and I sense that it is with these guys, something where you all vibe the same. When you just meet somebody and you have an instant rapport because you see things the same way, and hopefully you can disagree about things along the way and have different perspectives. You don't want everybody with the same input all the time, because then the old saying is, if you have two people who agree all the time, then one of them is unnecessary. But I think you can have productive disagreements, and you can have productive, conflict if you all have the same general idea about how you want to get somewhere. And I'm getting that sense so far.
Yeah, well, he's the head coach, so.
Okay, so this was a question about whether Burke was, I like the smile on his face. Is Burke going to be calling the plays?
It's his decision. Yeah, I think we just, like, again, I think we're getting to know each other through this whole process, and it's been cool. Like, I feel fortunate my office is right next to his. It's literally right next door. So, yeah, I don't put a lot of weight in any of that stuff. Again, I'm here to help him execute what he wants to this team to be and what this defense to look like. And if it's calling plays, that's great. If that helps him be a better head coach, if he wants to get his hands a little dirtier, then I'm here to help serve him do that. So, yeah, it really wasn't like a sticking point in the process. It was more just like, hey, this is how I see things. This is how I see defense being run and called. And I was like, I see the same way basically. And I think we'll sort that out as it goes. I think, again, it's a learning process for all of us. Right? He's a first-time head coach, so he's learning what he can do and what he can't and where he can put his energy and stuff. And, again, I think the whole staff feels You guys feel it. I don't know. Like, it's palpable, like the excitement and energy. So I think the whole staff is like very committed to DeMeco and trying to help him be the best and help this organization get there.
I feel it, Matt Burke. I feel it. I feel it. I'm a sucker. That part that he said at the end about, wanting to help DeMeco, again, it's hard to explain, and I don't expect people to believe it because you hear glowing comments and appraisals of every new coach. But there is something about DeMeco. We've heard about it from Mike McDaniel. We've heard about it from Kyle Shanahan. We've heard about it from John Lynch. They talk about DeMeco using different adjectives in a different tone of voice than they talk about other coaches. Words like special, unique, those types of things. And it's true because he is special and unique. And I do feel that he's that kind of guy you feel an obligation to. You don't want to let him down. You want to help him because you love the guy and you want to see him do well. So there is that part of it. As far as the play calling goes, yeah, I think I suspect DeMeco will start off calling plays and get a feel for whether he is delegating properly, whether he can handle everything, whether it's taking up too much of his time and energy. And I think whether people like it or not, it's not just the Patriots. There are a lot of teams that do play calling by committee. Kansas City, the Chiefs on offense, it's always dicey to try to claim who's actually calling the plays. At any given point, you can say, yes, Andy Reid's calling the plays, or no, Eric Bieniemy is calling the plays, because it changes. It's fluid. It's by situation. It's all of those things. And I think that's what the Texans will be. So as long as it's working well, people don't care. It's when things fall apart that you start to wonder, why is Bill O'Brien not? Why is George Godsey calling plays? Or why is Tim Kelly calling plays or not calling plays? Let's hope that we don't have to worry about it, is what I'm saying right now.
That staff had a ton of experience, and
okay, so here he's talking about the Titans when he joined them after they'd been to the Super Bowl. So in 99, that season, 99, 2000, whenever that was, he joined the staff. Jim Schwartz, defensive coordinator, had called up Harvard and basically said, hey, you got any smart guys up there? Because I guess Schwartz was just looking for a different type of guy, maybe trying to mix it up a little bit. And Matt Burke was on the staff at the time and basically packed his stuff up in a shoebox and headed down to Nashville.
Thankful to Dave McGinnis. He was a linebacker coach when I was the defensive QC, and he really let me be hands-on. And
QC is quality control coach, kind of like an intern, grad assistant type in the pros.
Let me learn. My office was an actual storage closet that they converted into my office, but he didn't keep me in the closet. He let me come out and do some drills and stuff. He didn't have to do that. It was, at the time, this was 20 years ago, the QC role was still evolving into what it was.
Yeah. So, I think, again, it was interesting because that was a time where they did some really cool things on that defense. They had a really good offensive and defensive line coach, Jim Washburn on defensive line and Mike Munchak as the offensive line coach. So I think that with all those guys in the front seven coaching on both sides of the ball, McGinnis as well, Burke had a nice intro to it. And, elsewhere in this press conference, he mentioned names that Houstonians know about Steve McNair or Eddie George and those guys, and obviously Mike Munchak.
I'll say two of the best line coaches in the league.
Oh, yeah, here we go. He's talking about Washburn and Mike Munchak here.
We had Big Wash was the D-line coach and Munch was the O-line coach. And so seeing how that was built from those guys and how those two coached two of the, most important positions on the team, that was really cool to be around, I think, elite line coaches as well. So, it was just a really cool, immersive experience for me.
Okay, so I'll say two things about that. Jim Washburn, this is what you need to know about Jim Washburn. Do you remember how Jason Babin was a big bust for the Texans? Yeah. Jim Washburn got a hold of Jason Babin and turned him into a sack leader in the NFL. It was a complete transformation. It was a better fit. I think ultimately Babin was a bad fit for a 3-4 defense. He goes to the 4-3 that they were playing where you got wide 9 defensive ends and you just get after it with your hand in the dirt. Babin was really, really good at that. And Jim Washburn was a defensive line coach who is just notorious for getting the most out of guys, whether it be Babin or anybody else. And then obviously Mike Munchak. I've talked about this a lot before. I played against Mike Munchak's offensive lines a whole bunch, twice a year when I was with the Jaguars, twice a year when I was with the Texans, and they were just flat out better, the better coach than anybody else. The Titans offensive line, when Munchak was the coach, would do all of these little things that would, influence blocks where you'd feel like you were beating the offensive lineman. All of a sudden they'd wheel on you and you were completely sealed off from the play. They'd get you. They were like judo masters. They'd get you going one way and then hip toss you. They're very, very good at understanding exactly what was going on any given offensive play. And that all started with Munchak. You can just tell as a defensive lineman, you can tell the offensive lines that are well coached because look, if I'm going against Bruce Matthews or any of those other, really good offensive linemen, okay, I expect that guy to be good. It's the guys you've never heard of or the guy that got called up from practice squad that embarrasses you on some play because he uses like a really good skilled technique or tactic. That's the stuff that you got from Munchak. So I like that Burke has been exposed to those guys and to that level of thinking.
I basically during the week would put together stuff, teaching tapes for the players, for the whole team.
Oh, okay. So this was on his stint with the Jets when he was the defense. He was the the strategy, the team. Oh man, you know what? I'm gonna look this up right now because I don't want to mess this up. He was like the defensive strategy assistant or something. Tell you what it is. It was a weird and unique position, which he alludes to here, and it's actually pretty funny. Game management coach. That thing that we're always saying that various coaches, whether it be Andy Reid or lesser coaches, will say, they need a game management coach. They need somebody to help with timeouts. Well, take a gander at this.
Again, I was very thankful. Coach Saleh gave me the opportunity to address the whole team a couple times a week, just on situational football, stuff that's happening around the league, penalties, whatever it may be, 2-minute stuff that came up that's just sort of like teach and educate the team. And then on game days, I was on the headsets on both sides with him, like talking him through, hey, we need to take a timeout here, hey, be alert to this, or challenges. So it was actually became, again, I'm grateful that he gave me a lot of work to do for kind of I don't say made up job, but just sort of plugged me in a way late. So, yeah, it was a great experience, man. I mean, like really like having to help him talk him through challenges and timeouts and how to use things and, hey, look out for this and all the end of game situation stuff. Like that was kind of my world. So again, here to help DeMeco. So if that's something that he wants me to kind of be a part of with him and help him as we go through that process, I'd be more than happy to, because it was a great experience, like contact with the league office on a lot of stuff, like just around the league. And then obviously going through that season and those game situations really helped broaden my horizons on.
Okay, so honestly, look, the Texans are going to make game management errors. Every single team in the league is going to at times. The thing that it's never easy to understand or grasp when you're watching a game is like how much more complicated it is to make these decisions on the field in real time when you got to get the right personnel on the field and factor in 29 other things while you're making these decisions. So I just like that. I think that even when they make mistakes, they'll be informed mistakes. I think that one thing that was happening under Lovie Smith was I think there was a sense that, okay, Lovie flat out wasn't going to embrace a lot of the modern aspects of football and some of the assets and tools that they now do have. I don't think you have to worry about that with any of these guys because right from the very top, DeMeco has openly talked about embracing the sports science aspect of things. And it doesn't mean that you got to be a bunch of nerds out there or think that you're going to win the game with a slide rule. It means that you're going to take advantage of every advantage you can find. And I feel really good. As Matt Burke alluded to, I think as a lot of us have noticed, they've put a lot of guys that get really excited about coaching football on this staff. And as a player, I can tell you, that shines through. Guys that don't have ego, guys that aren't afraid to be curious or ask questions themselves, and guys that just genuinely want the best out of their players and want you to have fun playing football. That comes through. I think it's a really good feeling. And like I said, it's not just a matter of comparing this staff to other Texans staffs or other teams that I've been on. I don't think you necessarily get this kind of alignment in philosophy and attitude and personality early on in a lot of places. Now all you got to do is go out and win some football games. Easy, right? All right, everybody. Thanks for joining. Please, subscribe. Just subscribe. Tell a friend. Share this video. It's a big old party we're having here, and we're building up a whole big base of subscribers. I love it. I have a great time doing these. I get to just nerd out on football and get awesome feedback from you guys. So let's keep it going. Subscribe, like, all that good stuff. Thanks.